In 1945, Ho Chi Minh also wrote to Sukarno, suggesting that Vietnam and Indonesia help each other in the post-war struggle against their former colonial masters. Like Truman, Sukarno did not reply. He was sympathetic to Ho, but afraid of contact with a communist leader as the Cold War became more apparent. Indonesia had its own problems. During the war, the Dutch had fled into exile or had been brutally interned by the Japanese. Now they vowed to punish Sukarno for collaborating with the Japanese and to take back the Dutch East Indies. In September 1945, British troops landed on Java to take the Japanese surrender. The British brought Dutch exiles with them. The Dutch freed their imprisoned countrymen and gave them arms. The Allies ordered Indonesians to surrender the weapons given them by the Japanese. The Indonesians refused. Within weeks, fighting began. In October at Surabaya, Indonesians battled the British and their Indian troops called Gurkhas.
Every day you had fighting. The British occupying half of the city, and we are in the southern parts. At some morning, I was still working at my headquarters, and then a girl came in better dress, so came there and put the head of a Gurkha officer in front of me on my table, with his ribbons completely. He has fought already in the Second World War.
The Indonesians fought fiercely for 3 weeks. Though the outcome was inconclusive, the Battle of Surabaya inspired many more Indonesians to fight. Militant youth groups became the core of a new revolutionary army. Youth leaders, barely out of their teens, quickly became senior officers in the struggle against the British and the Dutch. One of these was Abdul Haris Nasution, who would become chief of staff of the Indonesian army.
I can hide me among the paddy fields, but the Dutch soldiers are not going through the paddy fields, they are going through the dikes. We are in our own country. The people is our, the terrain is our. We can be everywhere. If the people is loyal to the Republic, then the army can move everywhere and have its own security, logistics with the people.
United by their hatred of the Dutch, Indonesians in the countryside banded together to form a guerrilla army. At the same time, a new government proclaimed by Sukarno attempted to negotiate with the Dutch. The Dutch insisted that Sukarno was both a Japanese collaborator and a communist. In 1947, the talks broke down and the war began in earnest. The Dutch attacked with armored divisions and air support. Within 2 weeks, they controlled all the major cities on Java and Sumatra. But the Indonesians still ruled the countryside. In the midst of the fighting, some Dutch were also troubled by conscience. One Dutch soldier, H.C. Prinsen, actually switched sides.
We had lived through the German occupation. I had been in German prison myself, in concentration camps. So I felt very upset that we are going to do the same thing in Indonesia that the Germans had done against us. Once I came to Indonesia, it appeared to be true that we were fighting for the return of our profits. So in 1948, I decided that the moment had come, and I went to the other side.
In the midst of the struggle against the Dutch, Indonesian communists tried to take control of the country. They were crushed not by the Dutch, but by General Nasution's Indonesian army. In December, the Dutch used the confusion to launch an offensive. They captured Sukarno and the Dutch capital of Yogyakarta. Sukarno's supporters appealed to the United States. The United States had refused to intervene in the struggle because the Dutch had assured them that Sukarno was a communist. Now convinced that Sukarno was not a communist, the U.S. threatened to cut off Marshall Plan aid to Holland unless the Dutch left Indonesia. The Dutch agreed to a ceasefire. There was bitter fighting until the very end.
I had married a woman from here, and then the last day before the ceasefire, they killed my wife and 20 of my soldiers. So they were still able to hit me at the last moment.
On December 27, 1949, the Dutch finally relinquished their control over their old East Indies empire. The Dutch agreed to Indonesia's sovereignty. The next day, mobbed by cheering crowds, Sukarno drove to the Governor-General's palace.
I raised both hands high. A stillness swept over the millions. There wasn't a sound, except for the silent tears. Nothing moved.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Thank God we are free.